Welcome to episode 32 of Henry George Daily Devotional. Time to devote ourselves to the land value tax. We continue. We've now reached chapter 3, Inferences from Analogy in Book 2, Population and Subsistence. Looks like we're going to do some more Malthusian theory analysis and disproval. If we turn from an examination of the facts brought forward in illustration of the Malthusian theory to consider the analogies by which it is supported, we shall find the same inconclusiveness. The strength of the reproductive force in the animal and vegetable kingdoms, such facts as that a single pair of salmon might, if preserved from their natural enemies for a few years, fill the ocean, that a pair of rabbits would, under the same circumstances, soon overrun a continent, that many plants scatter their seeds by the hundredfold, and some insects deposit thousands of eggs, and that everywhere through these kingdoms each species constantly tends to press, and when not limited by the number of its enemies, evidently does press, against the limits of subsistence, is constantly cited from Malthus down to the textbooks of the present day as showing that population, I assume he means human here, likewise tends to press against subsistence, and when unrestrained by other means, its natural increase must necessarily result in such low wages and want, or, if that will not suffice, that the increase still goes on in such actual starvation as will keep it within the limits of subsistence. But is this analogy valid? I don't know. Ask yourself, reader, listener, viewer, do you think we're the same as bunnies or ants? Let's see what George says. It is from the vegetable and animal kingdoms that man's food is drawn, and hence the greater strength of the reproductive force in the vegetable and animal kingdoms than in man simply proves the power of subsistence to increase faster than population. Ooh, that's a good move, George. If everyone's saying, look at the bunnies and the plants and they reproduce so fast, that is actually the power of subsistence to grow so quickly that it can maintain us. Anyway, back to George. Does not the fact that all of the things which furnish man's subsistence have the power to multiply manyfold, some of them many thousandfold, and some of them many million or even billionfold, while he is only doubling his numbers, shows that, let human beings increase to the full extent of their reproductive power, the increase of population can never exceed subsistence? How come that became a question? Oh, does not the fact that all these things can outproduce humans, uh, does it not the fact that all these things which furnish masters have the power to multiply manyfold, um, show that the increase of population can never exceed subsistence? This is clear when it is remembered that though in the vegetable and animal kingdoms each species, by virtue of its reproductive power, naturally and necessarily presses against the conditions which limit its further increase, yet these conditions are nowhere fixed and final. No species reaches the ultimate limit of soil, water, air, and sunshine, but the actual limit of each is in the existence of other species, its rivals, its enemies, or its food. Thus the conditions which limit the existence of such of these species as afford him subsistence, man can extend. In some cases his mere appearance will extend them, and thus the reproductive forces of the species which supply his wants, instead of wasting themselves against their former limit, start forward in his service at a pace which his powers of increase cannot rival. If he but shoot hawks, food birds will increase. If he but trap foxes in the wild, rabbits will multiply. The honeybee moves with the pioneer, and on the organic matter with which man's presence fills the rivers and fishes feed. Yeah, this yeah, I don't think animal rights people were around during this time. But this could be a nice jumping off place to talk about some animal rights concerns, I suppose. Um, but I think we could easily ethically consume food or consume animals and treat them well and still have way more of them than would probably even exist in nature, living probably better or less stressful lives than if they lived in nature. But a lot of our farming practices have been uh, weirdly messed with. But that's a separate discussion. Even if in any consideration of final causes be excluded, even if it be not permitted to suggest that the high and constant reproductive force in vegetables and animals has been ordered to enable them to subserve the uses of man, and that therefore the pressure of the lower forms of life against subsistence does not tend to show that it must likewise be so with man, the "roof and crown of things," yet there still remains a distinction between man and all other forms of life that destroys the analogy. Of all living things, man is the only one who can give play to the reproductive forces more powerful than his own, which supply him with food. Beast, insect, bird, and fish take only what they find. Their increase is at the expense of their food, and when they have reached the existing limits of food, their food must increase before they can increase. But unlike that of any other living thing, the increase of man involves the increase of his food. If bears instead of men had been shipped from Europe to the North American continent, there would now be no more bears than in the time of Columbus, and possibly fewer, for bear food would not have been increased, nor the conditions of bear life extended, but the bear immigration, but probably by the bear immigration, but probably the reverse. But within the limits of the United States alone, there are now 45 millions of men when there were only a few 100,000. And yet there is now within that territory much more food per capita for the 45 millions than there was then for the few 100,000. It is not the increase of food that has caused this increase of men, but the increase of men that has brought about the increase of food. There is more food simply because there are more men. Bum bum bum. Here is the difference between the animal and the man. Both the jayhawk and the man eat chickens, but the more jayhawks, the fewer chickens, while the more men, the more chickens. Both the seal and the man eat salmon, but when a seal takes a salmon, there is a salmon the less, and were seals to increase past a certain point, salmon must diminish. While, by placing the spawn of the salmon under favorable conditions, so a man can so increase the number of salmon as more than to make up for all he may take, and thus, no matter how much men may increase, their increase need never outrun the supply of salmon. Bum bum bum. In short, while all through the vegetable and animal kingdoms the limit of subsistence is independent of the things subsisted, with man the limit of subsistence is, within the final limits of earth, air, water, and sunshine, dependent upon man himself. And this being the case, the analogy which it is sought to draw between the lower forms of life and man manifestly fails. While vegetables and animals do press against the limits of subsistence, man cannot press against the limits of his subsistence until the limits of the globe are reached. Observe, this is not merely true of the whole, but of all the parts, as we cannot reduce the level of the smallest bay or harbor without reducing the level not merely of the ocean with which it communicates, but of all the seas and oceans of the world. So the limit of subsistence in any particular place is not the physical limit of that place, but the physical limit of the globe. 50 square miles of soil will, in the present state of the productive arts, yield subsistence for only some thousands of people, but on the 50 square miles which comprise the city of London, some 3.5 millions of people are maintained. And subsistence increases as population increases. So far as the limit of subsistence is concerned, London may grow to a population of 100 millions, or 500 millions, or 1,000 millions, for she draws for subsistence upon the whole globe, and the limit which subsistence sets to her growth in population is the limit of the globe to furnish food for its inhabitants. Bum, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. But here will arise another idea from which the Malthusian theory derives great support, that of the diminishing productiveness of land. As conclusively proving the law of diminishing productiveness, it is said in the current treatises that were it not true that beyond a certain point land yields less and less to additional applications of labor and capital, increasing population would not cause any extension of cultivation, but that all the increased supplies needed could and would be raised without taking into cultivation any fresh ground. Assent to this seems to involve assent to the doctrine that the difficulty of obtaining subsistence must increase with increasing population. But I think, now, what do I think? I mean, there is, yeah. We could have a planet with 1 billion trillion people all piled up into one London. They would require a lot of land elsewhere used for, animals or plant or whatever, agriculture. But yeah, we could all live within one area, but I don't think it quite works out that you can have in a 30 square mile 1 billion people and have that density all over the earth. When you're talking about the capacity for one little bit of area to support so many people, I think it's a little, yeah, I don't know, seems a little exaggerated. Because I can imagine a peak populated Earth would still have a lot of low density areas, where it's just more efficient to grow things than to house the people. Anyway, of course there would be a gradient in the actual distribution of the people of some kind. All right. Back to George. But I think the necessity is only in seeming. If the proposition be analyzed, it will be seen to belong to a class that depend for validity upon an implied or suggested qualification, a truth relatively, which taken absolutely becomes a non-truth. Very good point. For that man cannot exhaust or lessen the powers of nature follows from the indestructibility of matter and the persistence of force. Production and consumption are only relative terms. Speaking absolutely, man neither produces nor consumes. The whole human race, were they to labor to infinity, could not make this rolling sphere one atom heavier or one atom lighter, could not add to or diminish by one iota the sum of the forces whose everlasting circling produces all motion and sustains all life. That's true. If we were able to technologically, kind of like the still suits in Dune that recycle water with like super duper high efficiency, if we could do that also for like food and matter, where like, I don't know, would a human be able to wear a special suit where it was just basically what do they call it? What do they call those machines that never stop? Perpetual motion machine. Like if you could wear a little suit that could capture all of your carbon emissions, all of your heat that you emanate, recycle your feces and urine. Uh, I don't know. How would you would need to at least have a that wouldn't work for your growth stages where you are gaining mass. You would need an injection of resources up until you finish growing. Um, Table Cat says, in all this writing, they don't mention entropy at all. This wasn't written by a physicist. True. I don't like it when physicists talk about entropy, though, because I don't know what entropy is. I can't spell entropy. Alright, we'll just go back to George in our confusion. As the water that we take from the ocean must again return to the ocean, so the food we take from the reservoirs of nature is, from the moment we take it, on its way back to those reservoirs. When we draw from a limited extent of land, what we draw from a limited extent of land may temporarily reduce the productiveness of that land, because the return may be to other land, or may be divided between that land and other land, or perhaps all land. But this possibility lessens with increasing area, and ceases when the whole globe is considered. That the earth could maintain 1,000 billions of people as easily as 1,000 millions is a necessary deduction from the manifest truths that, at least so far as our agency is concerned, matter is eternal and force must forever continue to act. Life does not use up the forces that maintain life. We come into the material universe bringing nothing, and we take nothing away when we depart. The human being, physically considered, is but a transient form of matter, a changing mode of motion. As Yoda says, this crude matter, we are not luminous beings. Just kidding. He says, luminous beings we are, not this crude matter. George says, the crude matter we use is temporary. We give all that we take, we give back. The matter remains and the force persists, says George. Nothing is lessened, nothing is weakened. And from this it follows that the limit to the population of the globe can be only the limit of space. You might say energy, but anyway. Now, this limitation of space, this danger that the human race may increase beyond the possibility of finding elbow room, is so far off as to have for us no more practical interest than the recurrence of the glacial period or the final extinguishment of the sun. Yet remote and shadowy as it is this possibility which gives to the Malthusian theory its apparently self-evident character. But if we follow it, even this shadow will disappear. It also springs from a false analogy. That vegetable and animal life tend to press against the limit of space does not prove the same tendency in human life. Tablecat says they could at least write eventual heat death of the universe. Yeah, well, this is 1879. There wasn't even quantum theory and stuff yet, or yeah. They were pretty Laplacian or Newtonian in their physics. When was Laplace? 1750, 1827. When was Newton? He was 16. 1643, 1720. Wait, 1727. When was 1827? Okay, that's when he died. So they died 100 years apart. Anyway, granted that man is only a more highly developed animal, that the ring-tailed monkey is a distant relative who has gradually developed acrobatic tendencies, and the humpbacked whale a far-off connection who in early life took to the sea, granted that back of these he is kin to the vegetable, and is still subject to the same laws as plants, fishes, birds, and beasts, yet there is still this difference between man and all other animals. He is the only animal whose desires increase as they are fed, the only animal that is never satisfied. The wants of every other living thing are uniform and fixed. The ox of today aspires to no more than did the ox when man first yoked him. The seagull of the English Channel, who poises himself above the swift steamer, wants no better food or lodging than the gulls who circled round as the keels of Caesar's galleys first grated on a British beach. Of all that nature offers them, be it ever so abundant, all living things save man can take and care for only enough to supply wants which are definite and fixed. The only use they can make of additional supplies or additional opportunities is to multiply. But not so with man. No sooner are his animal wants satisfied than new wants arise. Food he wants first, as does the beast. Shelter next, as does the beast. And these given, his reproductive instincts assert their sway, as do those of the beast. But here man and beast part company. The beast never goes further. The man has Isn't that crazy to think that he assumes that men want to eat, uh, have shelter, and then they want to have kids. It's like today people are like, yeah, eat, shelter, have a nice career, have my hobbies, and then maybe I'll have kids. I think we're so disconnected from what we truly want. Um, I will continue. Uh, the beast never. The man has but to set his feet on the first step of an infinite progression, a progression upon which the beast never enters, a progression away from and above the beast. Yeah. Interesting. Alright. See you next time. I'm ending it there. You animals, you.